Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rethinking Performance Reviews and Employee Performance. I'm excited to be here and hope you are as well. I wanted to do a quick intro to myself. I'm Barbra Gago, the founder and CEO of a company called Pando. I'm the former CMO at Miro, which is in the visual collaboration space. I've spent a decade as an executive at fast growth startups, at the intersection of future of work tools like Miro and people tools like Greenhouse and Culture Amp. This topic is really important to me and special to me because it's something that I've been focused on my entire career. And as a marketing leader and an executive, having had a lot of challenges getting it right and really building tools on my own to help facilitate growth and impact of employees. Quick intro on Pando. Pando is an employee progression platform, so it's reinventing the traditional concept around performance reviews. It's more bottoms up, more employee driven, more focused on how to create iterative impact that's always on and gives employees and managers real-time insight into where they are in their performance and how they get to the next level. For employees, it's a lot more equitable, creating structure and transparency so that they know exactly what they need to do. And for organizations, it's a way to optimize impact. So what are we going to talk about today? We will be covering how to think about employee performance and what are some of the changes that we're seeing in the space and some of the trends that are really driving the need for changing how we think about employee performance. We're going to talk a little bit about how to set up a performance system that's more engaging and more equitable, that will ultimately help you unlock employee growth and accelerate employee impact. And also, how do we think about measurement and what does that look like and what should that look like? So to kick things off, I think everyone is pretty aware and have felt the effects, obviously, of the pandemic and what has really changed in the workplace. But it was really an inflection point for what the workplace actually means and what the expectations are for organizations, for managers, as well as employees about what it should be and how they want to interact with it. It was definitely sort of a perfect storm of a trend that we had already seen, which was remote work kind of building up, that really quickly turned to many organizations switching completely to remote work. Many companies now are going back to in-office. There's still a lot of kind of transition there. But what the workplace actually means and what it looks like changed very rapidly, and all of us sort of experienced that at the same time. Diversity and equity obviously has been a major topic for HR organizations and companies broadly, as we know that diversity creates much higher performing organizations, but there's still a lot of challenges around what that looks like within companies. External social injustice in the US and other places really have caused employees to reconsider what they want from their workplace, especially when it comes to fairness in how people are paid, what roles they have, how they're evaluated for performance, etc. And there was a major power kind of shift when the pandemic hit, where employees had a lot more power. This power has been growing over the years. Currently, I think it's temporarily sort of shifted back to organizations as we've come into a bit of a downturn in terms of economic situation. But there's really values and perspectives that are changing from employees in terms of what they want out of work. Because we're talking about performance, I want to kind of set the stage around what performance looks like today. And I think that many people can agree that you don't really have a great experience when it comes to performance. If you're lucky, you have an organization who's thinking about this really innovatively. Most of the time, it's a process that people really dread, I would say. It's typically annual, maybe it's biannual, but it really is a large scope in terms of work that needs to happen in order to get a sense of employee performance. So it's a laborious process. It's very heavy. There's a lot of steps. It takes a lot of time. a major complaint about it, and we've seen the impact of that in data, but it's very subjective. There's generalized questions. You get one rating for overall performance. It's often biased because managers are ill-equipped to rate people in an unbiased way. And it's also very qualitative and rarely reused. So a lot of times employees will go into those conversations with their managers, sometimes not even knowing if they're getting promoted or if they're getting fired. And that content and that feedback kind of just sits there and never gets used again once you have that calibration conversation. So all of that is to say that it's a very ineffective and a process that isn't really helping us optimize the work that we're trying to do and the impact that we can have and the impact that employees can have. And I think when it comes to performance, employees really, at this point, they want to know that they're fairly paid. They want to know that compensation is fair and those decisions are fair and how they're evaluated is fair. And they also want to make sure that that's fair for everybody, like the system itself is fair, which I think most employees don't trust the system as it is today. And they want to be given clear and ongoing opportunities to grow in their career. And I think there's, a pretty clear correlation with employee growth and company impact. So we want to be able to more effectively optimize how employees are focused so that they can have the impact that we want them to have. So the future is really moving away from performance reviews. I think we've kind of seen the pendulum swing back and forth here where we do performance reviews. It's kind of a necessary evil, but at the same time, what we really like is continuous feedback. And so we've kind of swung into that side of things. But the problem with continuous feedback is without the context anchored for individuals in their own context and performance, it can be something that either happens for employees or doesn't happen for employees, and it's not necessarily moving them down the field and getting them closer to the next level. And this is where kind of the structure and the underlying system around performance becomes really important. But I think if we can move to a point where we're not doing cyclical reviews, I come from sales and marketing. If I was waiting for, the end of the year to analyze the data, we will have lost a lot of opportunity and a lot of revenue throughout the year because we are sitting and waiting to see what the result is of all of our efforts. And so our people and performance from that perspective is equally as critical to know what's happening real time. And so getting to a point where we're not doing these big laborious performance reviews every year is going to be really important for that. So what does that look like? What is continuous progression or continuous performance management? But it's really real-time measurement of employee performance. So it's a philosophy, it's a set of processes that create transparent, actionable performance. And we're going to talk about those today, and you will walk away with some ways to do this. But really it's moving from that waterfall, big, laborious process to something that happens all the time, and not just feedback. It's anchored in structure and measurement and kind of iteratively seeing that progress. That's a bit different than just thinking about, okay, well, we're going to give employees feedback every week. That's important, but is that feedback anchored in the right context for them and for the business in order to have that impact? So what are some of the characteristics? I think the biggest shift here is that this should be something that's employee driven and bottoms up. So it's not about having a top-down evaluation of performance. It's about bottoms up collaboration between manager and employee around where and what to focus on, and having that conversation happen regularly so that employees are less likely to underperform, and actually we have an opportunity to optimize performance of more employees. One of the important keys here is that it's contextualized by level. So if you don't have clear levels defined for the organization, if this isn't something that's shared with employees, this is going to be a barrier to having this context. It should be more around short, ongoing assessments of performance, not big, long, laborious, 360, all of the things. All of that can be integrated in a more frequent way. Competency-based is another big tool here. So this is where you get context relevant to individuals based on their role and their level. So if they're a marketer or a salesperson or an engineer, they need to know what are the specific skills they are developing in and how does that impact the results that you're trying to get from them. And that needs to be very clearly tied. One of the big shifts and trends we've seen as well is moving towards level progression rather than focus so much on promotion. So how do we make it successful? I mentioned a couple of these already, but really getting to standardized leveling, having your compensation philosophy aligned with a more continuous progression, which means maybe you have more frequent, smaller increases for employees so that they're not focused so much on getting that huge promotion, and it's also not, 10, 15% increase, but rather having smaller iterative steps along the way. Career tracks are really important. So a lot of companies do have IC and manager career tracks, but the IC track kind of stalls out or plateaus early in the manager track. So I think one of the big trends is really increasing the number of steps that individual contributors can take. Only 15% of people actually want to be managers. So if you're not creating a path for people to continue to be that subject matter expert, they're going to end up wanting to be a manager, and that could have unwanted negative impact on the company because they're actually not that good at it. Competency-based, I mentioned, having regular small batch feedback and coaching in the context of competencies based on someone's level, and clearly defined performance goals. So what we're really trying to get to is the what and the how. So what is doing the things that we need people to do? If they're engineers, if they're sales, if they're marketing, these are the results. This is the impact that we want. How is through that competency-based framework. So if you do these things this way, here are the behaviors, here are the tasks, and you're performing in those different dimensions at a high level, you will be getting the impact and results that we want. I think a culture of transparency and candor is something that we're all striving for today with compensation legislation coming in and things like that. It's going to become kind of table stakes anyway, so it's something that we should all be moving towards. I always want to bring up job leveling because I think it's something that feels maybe arbitrary or just, I don't know, it's important for comp, but not necessarily for progression. But it is actually one of the most important things when I think about employee performance because it's how employees grow in your organization. The number of levels you have is really setting the stage for how much they can grow, how far they can grow, how many steps they have, how much they feel that they're growing, because even if you pay them more every year because they're doing well, maybe they still don't feel like they have career progression because they've been in the same level for 4 or 5 years. So this is really important. It's also important for equity. So not just bringing people into the organization and hiring better, but also ensuring that everybody at the same level within the organization is held to the same standard. Of course, their competencies will be different, the expectations will be different, the pay could even be different, but at least the expectation and how you're holding people accountable is consistent. It'll help you mitigate risk as you grow. It'll help you avoid pay inequities if you're bringing people in and measuring them and looking at performance at the same level. And it obviously will help keep you competitive, especially if it's something that you're communicating. I think the main thing here is that if you're keeping employees in the dark about their future, like not showing them what their progression can look like, not showing them the levels, not showing them what success looks like and how it's actually measured, you're essentially telling them that they don't have a future. And this is how employees feel. So it's really important that we show them, that we talk about it, that we make it transparent. Reducing bias and subjectivity is a major goal in kind of continuous progression for a couple of reasons. We want to optimize impact of everybody. We want to level the playing field for everybody. We really want to focus on how do we enable the most people to perform their best and stop focusing so much on, who is our top 10%. There's a tons of kinds of biases that show up in performance reviews, which I'm sure everybody here is aware of, has experienced, and maybe even have had their own biases in rating. I think, gender bias, obviously, rater bias, comparing managers comparing themselves, recency bias is obviously a big one. So these are all things that we want to avoid so that we get a better result from how we're doing performance and evaluating employees. To create more equitable performance, we need to, like I said, communicate level expectations. That should be communicated up front. Competency-based evaluations is a way to really reduce subjectivity for managers when they're rating, but also gives employees a lot more clarity on how to rate themselves. All of that should be available all of the time, upfront, during, post-assessment, etc. And then how are you tracking and gathering evidence against these dimensions as you go, rather than, of course, waiting till the end of the year to then figure out, oh, what did I do? Or driving behavior change that we don't want to see, which is, oh, performance reviews are coming, let me do a bunch of work, or let me find a strategic project, because employees are obviously optimizing for that recency bias as well. This is just an example of what competency-based evaluation could look like. So for this person, insights is one of their competencies. They're a level 7. Here's the definition. Here's the expectations. You can see on the left, there's the rating and the evidence. This is really important for when you think about managers as well, because if this manager has someone who's at a 7 or a 6 or a 5, they can then evaluate their employees effectively based on what the expectation is that has been preset, and everybody is aware of that. So how do we use these elements to really unlock growth? I think levels and competencies creates a structure that's transparent and clear and effective for individual employees. So if you're a level 6, if you're a level 4, if you're a level 3, here are the competencies, here are the levels. Then they can set goals, they can be evaluated across dimensions, so it's a more nuanced approach. It's not just a single assessment, a single rating. Then they can understand where they have areas to grow, where they're doing really well. They can set goals, they can get feedback, they can get reassessed, and they can really continuously grow and evolve from there. This is just an example of the types of feedback and assessments that can be done on a regular basis. So weekly, obviously managers should be giving and getting feedback. They can be looking at goals, flagging things that could be an issue. On a monthly basis, the same thing. I think logging achievements and documenting achievements on a monthly basis is really important. At a quarterly level, you might introduce a career sync and really a specific one-on-one that's focused on, okay, how have you been progressing towards your career goals, and are you having the impact that we're looking for? Maybe semi-annually you can do those deep dive full assessments and more formal kind of process. The benefits of Always On obviously are to retain talent. I think that employees, one of the biggest issues that they have is that they don't feel that they have career advancement. So this is really important for career advancement, making performance evaluations more iterative, and really optimizing employee lifetime value. So employee lifetime value is all of the value that's created by an employee over their tenure. So when they start, there's a negative value, then they get to fully contributing. Eventually they decide to leave, and they leave. All of the work that they've done and the impact that they've had in their time there is what we call employee lifetime value. There's ways to increase employee lifetime value by shortening how much time it takes to get them to fully contributing, by increasing how high they grow. So do you have a number of levels? Can they grow in those levels over time? And can you retain them longer? And really how we see that is setting clear expectations for the role, having those be transparent throughout the time that they're in the role, having a structured growth path, so what are the steps that they can take, having that progression be continuous, and really leveling the playing field for everyone will create a diverse growth culture that will help you retain talent for a much longer period of time. We're going to talk about measurement very briefly because we've been measuring it all wrong. It's waterfall, it's biased, it's costly, it's inauthentic. People's behavior changes when it comes to performance reviews. So the first way we've been doing it is through a bell curve. This really alienates everybody who's not in the top 10%, and it overly focuses us on how do we even get more out of those top 10 performers. I think what we're really looking to do and need to do is understand how do we get more people performing their best, and how do we really optimize? As a founder, as an executive, as a leader, I don't want only 10% of my group to be top performing. I want to get as many people as I can to be top performing. We introduced the 9-box after the bell curve, and many companies still use this. The problem with this is that it's also very subjective for employees in terms of measuring potential. It's not a very easy tool for managers to use. Oftentimes they're very confused about how to use it, how to explain where an employee is and why the employee is in that bucket. People really feel like they're boxed in, even though it looks a little bit different from a bell curve. It's pretty much the same information. And so where we've really been missing is, what is this element of time and what is an employee's growth velocity, and can we optimize that growth velocity, which will ultimately increase that employee lifetime value. So we call this the employee growth score. This is really telling a story about how somebody is growing over time, what their growth rate is. We can look at average growth rate of organizations. We can look at the growth rate of different people. Are they above the growth rate, under the growth rate? This obviously will help us also get to more predictability of performance. But it's also a more realistic view of the reality of the situation. Are people growing very quickly? Has their growth stalled out? Is it slower? Is it faster? Are there certain demographics in the organization who are at a lower growth rate? And if so, why is that? So we really need to shift our mindset around how we're thinking about performance. And again, contextualize growth. This will encourage the right behaviors and ongoing behaviors, build that muscle around continuous progression and continuous growth, continuous development. The transparency we need to create structure and scale. And of course, we want to drive diversity, equity, and inclusion. And without this systematic sort of bottom layer of structure, it's not going to be possible. So at the end of the day, if we want to unlock the full potential of our workforce, it requires innovation, but also humanity. We need to do the right thing, which feels hard sometimes, and it's complicated to think about, and a lot of people benefit from the current system, but really this will help us much more effectively unlock the full potential of all of our employees in the future. So thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions, I know this was kind of rapid fire, but happy to chat anytime about anything related to performance, continuous performance, how to really unlock that iterative growth. You can reach out at pando.com. You can also find me pretty easily on LinkedIn, Barbra Gago. And yes, thanks so much and have a great rest of the event.